Hi, welcome to the fourth monthly meeting of the Denver Mushroom Cooperative. This is our very first virtual meeting, and when Corona World finally lets up, hopefully we will offer this as a hybrid experience. Um, there are many people in Denver that are actively participating in the co-op space, and with the thousands of people that we are connected with online, I would love to see this really become a much more robust and larger mycelial network. Um, what is the Denver Mushroom Cooperative? Denver Mushroom Cooperative is a group of people that are interested in collaborating with the mushroom kingdom and ultimately each other to solve some of the seemingly treatment resistant problems of our time. We share a collective belief articulated by Paul Stamets that all organisms that pair with fungi are rewarded. We seek to learn everything we can about the mycelial web and mimic that behavior to facilitate the never-ending cycle of life, death, and regeneration. By cultivating conscious community, the collective experiential wealth can be easily tapped into by the individual. Lovers of all mushrooms are welcome to participate, pontificate, and most importantly, intelligently collaborate. How did we get here? Initiative 301 was a citizen-spawned movement in Denver that ultimately we won by popular vote. And what I-301 did was allow individuals that are 21 years or older the opportunity to grow and utilize psilocybin mushrooms with no limits. And the second thing that it did was to install a review panel so that the city could collect data and report onto what actually happened when we decriminalized. So a lot of us from the campaign needed a way to figure out how to safely integrate these psychoactive mushrooms back into society. And with no already standing oversight, we had to kind of take the matters into our own hands. So after 7 months of brainstorming, we finally were comfortable enough to launch a cooperative. And it's a cooperative in name only right now, and it's an educational space where people can meet up, and hopefully the fruits of those connections will pay dividends in the future. Our first meeting was in a little coffee shop in Colorado, or in Denver, and the room probably would, say comfortably hold about 30 people, and I think about 60 people showed up. So right away, we knew that we were onto something. And by the third meeting, we were in a much bigger space at an art gallery that looked out for us and provided that. And our fourth meeting, which we had to postpone because of Corona World, we were anticipating over 120 people to show up. So within 4 months' time, we were seeing that people were ready for this type of space and this type of community. With everything that's happened with the virus, it really appears that we're dealing with a lot of collective trauma, that our current system can no longer help in the ways and means that we need. So that we feel that this is a unique opportunity for healing and utilizing a hyper-connected state to creatively solve problems and begin building a paradigm rooted in regeneration. The old norm has proven to be unsustainable, and we have reached the limitations of being dependent on a system when we could be self-reliant or ultimately reliant on one another. Our dream is to one day have a space to educate one another and foster connections that may not have happened any other way. Tonight's topic is about mushrooms and immunity. Traditional medicine paradigms have known the healing potential of mushrooms for millennia. Modern science is just catching up. Our main speaker tonight, Alex Dorr, wears many hats, or caps, in the mushroom world. He is a visionary, an artist, an entrepreneur, an author of a book on mycoremediation, a mushroom lover, and a self-described host for the cordyceps. When I first met Alex, he was on his way to the Telluride Mushroom Festival a few years ago, and he immediately impressed me with his warmth, his passion, and his energy. And this is something that I've come to find is a very common trait in mushroom people. And before I got involved with the campaign, Alex and the group of mycophiles that stopped by my house really entreated me to a what I was in for. So without further ado, Alex, if you would like to tell us a little bit about mushrooms and immunity.
Sure. Thanks for bringing me on, Travis, and it's awesome to see you again. And how's everyone doing in the mushroom family? Tuning in and shrooming in, sending love in the mycelial web. Yeah, so I'll just jump in. I'm going to share my screen here. It looks like the host needs to enable it, but yeah, once that gets enabled, great. Yeah, that was amazing stopping by your house and getting the gang together. Uh, you know, with Telluride, with so many gatherings and just like this, it's a perfect opportunity for people to come together and share love for mushrooms. Um, so so I'm going to talk about functional mushrooms. This is Mishima is or Meshima is Women's Island. It grows on mulberry trees, and it's a great for overall women's health and also for supporting the immune system. Tremella fusiformis. This is a really weird gelatinous mushroom and great for skin health and also brain health. This is another mushroom that's talked a lot about in China, but not so much in the United States. And I think I forgot chaga in these slides, but I'll talk about it in this slide. So Porreococos or Wolfiporia cocos is a sclerotia. So a sclerotia is kind of a mass of mycelium, and this kind of looks like a yam. And there's three parts of this sclerotia. A lot of people use the word mushroom just because it's, easy colloquially to say mushroom rather than sclerotia. Sclerotia is a mass of mycelium, and it's not technically a mushroom, which is the fruiting body of the fungus. So people in traditional Chinese medicine will use the outside, this bark looking part of the fungus. They'll use the inner, just under the bark, so to speak, which is that pinkish reddish layer. And then the meat, so to speak, is the white part. And so those are three parts of the fungus that they'll use for different things in traditional Chinese medicine. And it's also great for supporting the immune system. Chaga, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of, if not everyone tuning in. Chaga is another sclerotia. It looks like charcoal or a black canker on birch trees, and it's another sclerotia or canker. It's a massive mycelium, and it's another amazing mushroom that supports immune health. And last but not least, this is my favorite. This is Cordyceps militaris that I was talking about in the beginning. And this has I'm unbelievably obsessed with Cordyceps militaris and Cordyceps in general, or entomopathogenic fungi, which means fungi that attack insects. You can watch the BBC documentary. I think it's Planet Earth. And there's another one that just got released. And it's all about how this fungi controls the nervous system of these insects and grows out of them, which I think is unbelievably fascinating. And it's the weirdest, realist sci-fi that you'll ever see in the world. And so in the wild, these grow on moth larvae. But we at Mushroom Revival grow on a vegan kind of rice substrate, and they look like Cheetos. They're great for supporting energy levels and immune function. So these are amazing mushrooms, all great for the immune health, and they're all adaptogens, help adapt us to stress and fatigue. Super amazing. The problem is that there's so many companies out there that don't actually use mushrooms. They'll put mushrooms all over the packaging. They'll say mushrooms. They love to say mushrooms, but there's zero mushrooms in their products. If anyone that doesn't wild forage, they forage in their supermarket, so to speak. So what is in there? It's mycelium on grain, which is the roots of the mushroom growing on a filler substrate. And I'll get a little more into it. Just a brief overview. This is how mushrooms grow. So this is traditional Basidium mycota, and shoots out spores or the seeds. They grow into hyphae. The hyphae, or the little mycelial strands, come together. They fuse into mycelium, which is the roots of the mushroom, so to speak. They grow into primordia, or this little hyphal knot, and they grow bigger and bigger into a mushroom. This is what mycelium on grain looks like. A lot of mushroom growers will use this, and this is just rye berries, and the mycelium is growing around it, and people use it as spawn, so to speak, or for a plant, you would buy a tomato seed. So this is like a bag of seeds, so to speak, and this is what a lot of people will use for supplements. And why? We would love to use mycelium on grain in our products because it's a lot cheaper. It's unbelievably cheaper to use. It's quicker to produce. It takes about 2 weeks to make a fully grown mycelium on grain. Whereas for cordyceps, for example, reishi is another example, where they take longer to grow. It takes about 2 months, 2.5 months. And for beta glucans, for example, that's one compound that helps support the immune system. We have done testing with megazyme kits, and we found that mushrooms, particularly in cordyceps, are up to 400 times higher in 1316 beta glucans than mycelium on grain that you can find on a shelf. And we just pulled off the selling functional mushroom products off the shelf. 51 times more cordycepin, that's the main kind of energy molecule. 7 times more adenosine, the precursor of adenosine triphosphate, ATP, our body's main energy source. 13 times more amino acids. So really, there's no comparison. You'll hear it out there, but do your research, please. I mean, don't listen to me. Look it up for yourself. Search ResearchGate. Read the research papers. There's no comparison. I was actually just at International Medicinal Mushroom Conference in Nantong, China last fall, and yeah, it's only United States that sells mycelium on grain. It's only an American thing or a United States thing. This nowhere else in the world do they sell this. And so I'm bringing up a lot of compounds, 1316 beta D glucans, essentially, an amazing support for the immune system. Terpenoids or triterpenes, they are extracted with alcohol, and which is so important to do a tincture or an alcohol and a hot water extraction to get the full extraction of whatever mushroom that you're using. So, I would inquire about, is it are you just blending the mushroom into a powder? Are you just doing a tea? Are you doing a hot water and alcohol extraction? Am I actually going to get the compounds? Because this is super important. Mycelium and mushrooms are made of chitin. It's one of the hardest materials for our bodies to digest. It's the same material as shrimp or lobster shell. So it's unbelievably important to not only break that down, but have these compounds be soluble in whatever liquid or dry material that you're working with. If you don't know whether a medicinal mushroom product on the market it has fillers, you can do an iodine tincture test. This is really easy, really cheap, and you could just drop it on a powder. This only works with a powder. And if it changes color to that dark purple, there's fillers in the product. So that's just a quick and dirty little test. And the last slide that I'm gonna do, I know I'm bombarding information really quick, but it's really the comparison of I really want to show how new we are in the United States. The medicinal mushroom industry and the mushroom industry is just, we're babies here. So 500 AD Cordyceps cicadae are used as medicine. 700 AD Ophiocordyceps senescens are used for medicine. 1860 was the first cultivation of Cordyceps militaris in China. It wasn't until 2015 that Ryan Paul Gates produced the first fruiting body of Cordyceps militaris. So, that's a couple hundred years later almost. And now in China, they're growing millions of pounds of Cordyceps militaris and figured out how to grow over 91 different species of entomopathogenic fungi that they're using, some of them for medicine. We're unbelievably new here, and we're just kind of figuring out how to crawl, so to speak. So I'm unbelievably excited to see the research blossom and grow for mushrooms. We have such a huge amount of research to do, from clinical trials to the psilocybin space. I feel like is unbelievable in terms of mushrooms for health and well-being. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and please reach out if you have any more questions. Much love. May the spores be with you. Sending everyone a big virtual hug, and yeah, much love.
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Alex. There's a lot of things that I didn't even know, and I take cordyceps, and it's a game changer. Um, I was pretty addicted to coffee, or reliant on coffee for a long time, and cordyceps have definitely come in and saved the day. So thank you again. Next speaker we have is Gary Hefferly. Gary is a gourmet mushroom farmer from Littleton, Colorado, and he has a passion for sustainability, environmentalism, and education. Gary has been with us since the very beginning and continues to enrich our community with thoughtful and useful topics. I've been to Gary's homestead farm, and it's quite impressive. Today, Gary is going to discuss the cultivation of reishi, which is also known as Ganoderma lucidum. So without further ado, take it away, Gary.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Hey, so I would just like to thank Alex for that wonderful presentation. So I actually have some fruiting reishi right here. So my friend Zach had given me this as a gift. He actually grows a lot of reishi, and my goal was just to show everyone how simple reishi is to grow. So I like to tell people, I like to suggest people to grow reishi as the first mushroom because it can fruit easily in a growing bag. It's very resistant to contaminants. So the first process, like Alex was saying, to start off growing, you'd want to isolate some mycelium. So this is a petri dish of malt extract agar, and you can see the mycelium, which is the roots of the mushroom, growing on here. So it's important to have a healthy strain so that when you transfer it into either sawdust or bran or grain, it's going to continue growing. And this right here is oats. So you can use a number of different grains, and I prefer to use oats just because how inexpensive it is. But ideally, you'd want to sterilize your grain after it was hydrated. And just for ease of demonstration, I'm just going to use one of these liquid cultures. So I have these available on Etsy. My shop is Fresh Fungi. I restock fresh cultures every Friday. But basically, you can just take this liquid culture, which is just a honey water solution, and it has the mycelium, which is the roots of the mushroom, that's been growing in this sterile liquid. So there's So I just want to give a shout out to Lion's Mane. They're a local mycology shop in Denver, and you can get all of this equipment there for fairly cheap. But it's as easy as getting one of these liquid cultures and then inoculating it into this sterilized grain. And that's as simple as it is. So this will incubate for about 2 or 3 weeks until it colonizes. And you just want to pay close attention as it's growing to make sure that there's no contamination, which that will often show up as like a greasy spot or a discoloration. But you can see reishi is very hardy and it's quite resistant to contaminants, which I think that's why it's so medicinal. So once you have your fully colonized grain jar, you'll just want to break it up, and it's important to inspect the glass for any cracks because you can injure your hand when you're doing this, or it's probably better to hit it on like a tire or some soft surface. But I'm just doing this on a little cart right now to show how easy it is. So you'll just take your grain spawn and add it to your bulk substrate, and then you can either heat seal it or just use a little zip tie. And this is going to keep any contaminants out of the bag, and you'll want to mix it up thoroughly. So I use all locally sourced sawdust as my substrate. This is a maple and oak blend. I use that for most of my gourmet mushrooms. And then after a couple weeks, it's going to start growing. So you can see the mycelium that's starting to come from these grain spawn. And in about 2 or 3 weeks, it will fully colonize, and then it will look like this. And you can see this bag has been fruiting now for a couple days. It took about 4 weeks for it to colonize and then start to pin. And I like reishi because you can just leave this bag sealed at the top, and then it will start to create those cool antler shapes. And it's almost an art form. I'm really impressed by this fruiting body. This was from Zach, so you can tell that it started to conk out, and the reishi will react differently to different amounts of oxygen and lighting, and then you'll end up with a really nice fruiting body. So, like I said, all this is available at Lion's Mane. It probably costs under $10 for everything except for the culture. But if you do attend any future Denver Mushroom Cooperative meetings, we have been, trading cultures. And the first couple meetings, I gave away a bunch of my cultures just to get people started. And often, the first grow doesn't go as expected, but that's when you learn the most. So, are there any questions out there?
Nothing about the reishi specifically.
All right. Well, if anyone ever has questions about growing mushrooms, I have a YouTube video or a YouTube channel that I've started to do a breeding project. So there's a lot of info on there, and feel free to email me. I'm also going to be at various farmers markets throughout the summer. So if you have any questions, I love talking about mushrooms and cultivation, and I'm pretty open to answering questions. So if anyone has any question, what kind of reishi? So this is a Ganoderma lucidium. It's a red reishi, and it's one of my favorite just because of how hardy it is. But yeah, so feel free to email me if you have any questions, or I will see you at the next in-person meeting.
Can you hear me? Okay, there's a question. Do you have to keep the spores like in the dark after you inoculate?
Oh, that's a good question. So it's not necessary, but lighting will induce pinning. So I just leave, these bags colonizing at ambient temperature, but then as soon as it's fully colonized, I'll move it into my fruiting room, which does have light, and the light cycle will trigger these fruits to start to form.
And then the another question is, when do you open the bag?
When do you open the bag? So that is, an artistic part of growing reishi, because you can open the bag a little bit to start to induce the conking. or you can just leave the bag completely closed if you're afraid that you might get some contamination or you want the really long antlers. But I was talking to Travis before this started, and he had mentioned that at one point one of his rishis had grown out through the filter patch, so they'll find a way.
Somebody wants to know, will it do okay on manure
On manure.
or just sawdust?
Yeah, so I've never grown it on manure. Reishi is a saprobe, so it prefers dead wood. But that's not to say that you might be able to supplement it with that. But honestly, I think that it's easier to grow it on hardwoods because that's what it grows on in nature. So I don't know the answer to that, but I think that it's better to use hardwoods, and that's how it grows in nature.
Cool. Thank you. Have you made tinctures out of your
Have
reishi?
So I usually just make tea, just boil it on the stove for a couple hours, and it creates that really potent aroma. And I know that there might be some compounds that I'm missing out by not doing an alcohol extract, but it tastes really well, and it still has that immune boosting properties when you make a tea. So that's just how I prefer how to do it, just because I don't have an extractor or anything like that. But I'm open to learning that. So if anyone has like a easy process, feel free to reach out, because I'm always down to learn new tinctures or processes for getting the most out of my mushrooms.
Do you cut a hole in the top of the bag, or do you open the whole thing all the way up?
So personally, I open it all the way and grow it inside my fruiting tent, which is very high humidity. I've seen people that lay it on their side, and then you can get a really nice conch shape that way. But it really depends on your preference. If you're looking for tall, skinny antlers, then I would just leave the top sealed, because that's going to trap in more CO2. But the larger the hole, the more the CO2 will escape, and the reishi reacts to the CO2 levels in the bag.
Cool. Next question. Percentage of humidity in your tent. What's your relative humidity?
So I like to have very um, very fine control of my humidity throughout the process. So especially with like lion's mane mushroom, that's very sensitive at early stages, I'll keep my humidity at 98 to 96%. And then as the mushrooms develop, I'll slowly dial that back, maybe into like 86 to 88 range. It just depends on what type of mushroom, but reishi, they can handle the gamut of changes, and they're very hardy. So I mean, reishi can grow all the way up to 98% and all the way down to 80% humidity. But it just depends on what stage the mushroom's at. For pinning, you want higher humidity. For late stage fruiting, you want lower humidity to prevent any mold growth.
And I have a question personally. Have you ever tried to grow them on conifer or like pine?
So
Pine.
I have not, but I'm pretty sure that they would be able to handle that, just
Because
because of the rigor of the mushroom.
yeah, in Pennsylvania, I used to find them near hemlock trees.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I just wondered. I've never seen or heard of anybody try it with pine sawdust, but I just wondered.
Yeah, I've never tried it either, but it would be an interesting experiment.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gary. And
Yeah.
hopefully you have inspired many to begin their Rishi journey.
All right. All right. Well, thank you. And I look forward to seeing everyone in person. But I'm thankful for the opportunity to reach out to all of you guys. And I hope that you saw how easy it is to grow reishi. It should be everyone's first mushroom.
Cool. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Bye. And finally, our last speaker is Dylan Rivard of the NOAC Society. here to talk about harm reduction and benefit maximization around psychoactive mushrooms. We dedicate time every meeting to these pillars so that our attendees can take really good information out into the community at large and share. The NOAC Society is a Colorado-based nonprofit whose mission is to support people and communities in developing safe, informed, empowering relationships with self, others, and the medicines and drugs we interact with. And here's Dylan. Okay.
Cool. Hi, all. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Alex and Gary, for your presentations. That information was really wonderful and exciting. Mushrooms are just really cool. So yeah, as Travis mentioned at the beginning of this broadcast, psychoactive mushrooms have now been decriminalized in Denver, which means their possession and use are kind of the lowest priority for the police department. But know that that still means their sale and distribution is still very much illegal, and they're still illegal on a federal level. So we're in this kind of legal gray zone right now in Denver that's really nice. And if you decide to take advantage of it, I'm here to tell you about ways in which you can use psychoactive mushrooms to kind of keep yourself safe and those around you in the most responsible way possible. So the first thing to know about psychoactive mushrooms is the psychoactive ingredients inside them are called psilocybin and psilocin, and there may be others we have yet to discover, but those are kind of the two big ones we've identified so far. And everybody kind of has a different range of sensitivity to these compounds. You might have a little bit of mushrooms and have a very strong experience. You might be able to eat a fair bit and it could still be pretty mild for you. Everybody responds a little bit differently to these mushrooms. So if you kind of do a Google search for psilocybin dosing, you can find a range in terms of grams, ballpark figures for what work for most people, but know that your system might be particularly sensitive or insensitive to these mushrooms. So often it's really best to start slow, start with a small amount, and see how it impacts you. As with most drugs people ingest, a really common mistake is I ate a little bit, it's been 45 minutes, nothing seems to be happening, I'm gonna eat more. You see this a lot with medicinal edibles and marijuana. And then suddenly people are in a much more bigger experience than you'd expect, depending on what you've eaten that day, depending on just the speed of your own digestive system. These things could take anywhere from 45 minutes to even 2 hours to kick in. So really give yourself some time, sit with it, see how it goes, and know that you can always do it again at another date. Generally speaking, a psilocybin experience is going to be anywhere from like 6 to 8 hours. So really prepare yourself to set aside the better part of a day. And some people even report feeling kind of after effects as long as 24 hours after the fact. As with most medicines, the general rules of thumb still apply. You're going to maintain its potency and keep it best in a cool, dark, and dry place. And obviously, you want to keep it in a place that's kind of out of reach of children and pets. It is a very physically, like, reality-altering experience. So operating heavy machinery, driving a car, anything that would require a lot of kind of focus and understanding of what's going on in a really real-time way, it's probably something you shouldn't engage in. These types of experiences are best lent to walks, sitting, art, speaking with other people, but not, trying to accomplish the big tasks of your life. So when you're looking at doing an experience like this, often in the psychedelic realm, you'll hear two people talk about, set and setting as being really important to the psychedelic experience. Set refers to your kind of internal, mental, emotional, spiritual state, and setting is the literal physical setting you find yourself in. My recommendation for setting, again, set yourself aside at least those 6 to 8 hours, better part of a day. I'd encourage you to set aside a full day. And really set it up as a kind of staycation or spa day for yourself. It's nice to wear loose clothing, good to be able to unplug your phone, stay away from the computer, just really kind of disconnect for the better part of that day, and set yourself up to have some food on hand. Trying to cook in the middle of the experience is going to be really difficult, most likely. So if you can just have some easy go-to snacks, that can be nice. Certainly have plenty of water. Dehydration is an easy thing to run into. And yeah, at the lower doses, you might be able to find yourself still kind of interactive. You might be able to hang out with people or go for a walk. Obviously, enjoying nature is a really wonderful thing you can do in these experiences. And as you get to higher and higher doses, you kind of find yourself more and more incapacitated in a way. Harder to talk to people, harder to articulate your experience, harder to just go about normal functioning. You're going to seem odd if you were like out in public or anything like that. So as you get into the higher dose range, even medium dose range, better to stay at home, better to be somewhere safe in a controlled environment. And as you get into higher dose ranges, often more and more helpful to have a sitter, a friend or a partner, someone who you really trust who can be there with you, who can kind of help you in whatever logistics might need to happen. They can help get you food. If you start to get scared or get into some gnarly territory, they can be there with you in it, kind of talk you through it. And in that place, if you really have someone there who you can know, like, oh, they've got this, you get to really relax into the experience rather than being in what can often be a really difficult space of, I have to like manage my life and manage these things around me, but like I'm in a really altered state and that seems really hard and impossible. And now I'm just spiraling because I'm not able to do the things I need to do, but I need to do them, but I can't. And you could end up in that back and forth for hours. Finally, I just want to mention a little bit about set, that mental space. Mushrooms do bring a lot internally. They really let you kind of look deeply into yourself. There's lots of reports you can find online and anecdotal stories of people healing trauma, going through old memories. Sometimes it's about really beautiful spiritual experiences, and kind of whatever you're going to be in terms of your own mental space, you can kind of expect it to come up. So if you know you're really stressed with work or really stressed in your family dynamics, if you're really struggling with a lot of depression and anxiety, if you know it might be a hard experience, bringing in a sitter is all the more important, having someone really there to kind of be able to hold that with you. There's also something to be said about in the kind of adventure outdoors community, there's something called summit fever, people who climb mountains. They get close, it's the day they're supposed to climb the mountain, they're really excited to do it, but then the weather's bad, and they really shouldn't. But that was the day, and they've been planning months for it, so they go for it anyway. And that's where a lot of tragedy happens. People get hurt, sometimes people die, people are on mountains when they're not supposed to be. So be aware that you might yourself experience trip fever. Like you've set aside the time, you've set aside your day, you're kind of set up to do it, but you actually got some really crushing news last night, or the week has just been a bear in a way you would not have ever expected. It might be wise to actually set a trip aside, reschedule, plan another time, because your own personal set might not be in the place you want it to be. Ultimately, kind of trust your own intuition, trust what you can handle. And just be careful. Like you can always reschedule, and the more difficult trip experiences can be truly difficult. So don't just rush into it because you're overly excited. The final piece I'll mention is that in terms of setting, spiritual tools can often be really helpful. If you have any kind of spiritual practice, meditation, singing, prayer, mantra, these types of things can really kind of provide buoyancy and support in a difficult experience, or even just another layer of profound beauty if it's already going well. So in terms of kind of psychological first aid, if you have a kind of a short list of things you know help you feel good, even if it's something as simple as a gratitude practice or just recognizing your breath, these are things that can really support you if you find that your psychedelic experience is getting difficult. Again, something that can really help you get through it. And don't ever underestimate the importance of a sitter. If there's just somebody there with you and they kind of know what's going on, even if they're not super involved, they could be in another room or just another part of the house there if you need them, but not directly involved. That can create just so much more safety and containment to really let you have the experience you're looking to have.
Cool. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, that was great. That was really great. You touched on all the points. Yes, sitters are super important. It can never be understated. So thank you so much.
You might find yourself in a place of wishing you had a sitter, but you're probably never going to be in a place of regretting that you had one.
I agree. Thank you, Dylan. Is it back on me? Okay. Yeah, thank you so much to Alex, Gary, and Dylan for sharing. Yeah, I really can't wait to see everybody in the physical again. But until then, we're gonna really cultivate and maintain this online portal to the mycelial web. So for anybody that tuned in with us live, thank you so much. I'm gonna scan the Q&A for anything that might not have been touched upon. Gary, are you still on? No, Gary's not on. You can bring Gary back in. I have a question that came up for him specifically. Gary, one last question for you. What do you supplement your sawdust with for the reishi?
So I prefer to use soy. It holds water really well, so it helps keep the sawdust at the right moisture content. But you can use wheat bran or just straight up sawdust. That works too. I've done that.
Have you ever used corn cob?
I have.
Would you use that for reishi?
I use it for oyster mushrooms. It's okay. I think that wheat bran is better for the same price, just for yields.
Gotcha. And do you have an average output yield, like what you get back on how big of a block?
So I use 5-pound blocks and usually get about a pound per flush from reishi, but that's wet, so it'll dry out a lot.
Is there any way to like rehydrate the block?
I don't know. I've buried them in the soil after, and then sometimes you get some fruits, but it's usually not as good as that first in the bag one.
Cool. Yeah, that's been my experience with a lot of other species as well. But
Yep.
yeah, okay. That's it for the questions. Thanks again, Gary.
All right. Thanks again, guys.
Yep.
Much love.
Much love. And yeah, just to wrap this up, I just want to assure everyone out there that after a contraction comes a great expansion. So I hope that everyone has been taking the time to learn and experiment and really get in touch with themselves, so that when we get to play together again, that we'll have a lot to bring to the table. So that concludes our May meeting of the Denver Mushroom Cooperative. We will meet again on the third Monday of June, and I look forward to seeing everyone either physically or virtually. Have a good night.